Yesterday, the U.S. government published a report, and buried inside 47 pages of economic data was a single number that explains something you've probably been feeling for months, but couldn't quite put into words. 2.6%. That's how much of your income the average American is managing to save right now. Not invest, not build wealth with, just set aside. 2.6%. Before the pandemic, that number was 6.2%. A few years before that, closer to 8%. For most of American history, it hovered around 10%. We are now saving at a rate that in 60 years of recorded data has only been this low once. And here's the part that should stop you cold. This didn't happen because Americans are spending on vacations or new cars or anything they actually wanted to buy. It happened because in April people earned less and still had to spend more. Groceries, gas, utility bills. The things you can't cut. The things that don't care about your budget. That's what's draining the American household right now. And yesterday's government data put a number on exactly how bad it's gotten. By the end of this video, you'll understand the full picture, where this money is going, why it's getting harder to stop, and what it means for your financial situation going forward. My name isn't important. What matters is that I spent over 30 years inside the kind of institutions that produce reports like the one we're talking about today. I've read thousands of them. And I'll tell you something. Most of them get filed away and forgotten. This one shouldn't be. What the Bureau of Economic Analysis published yesterday is called the Personal Income and Outlays Report. They release it every month. Most people never hear about it. But this particular report, the April 2026 numbers, tells a story that every working American needs to understand. It's not just that incomes fell. It's not just that spending rose. It's that both happened at the same time, and the gap between them is now being filled by the one thing that can't last forever. We're going to break this down completely today, where the money is actually going, why the official numbers look better than your reality feels, what history tells us about moments like this one, and what, if anything, you can do about it. But before we get into it, and I say this at the start of every video because I mean it, what you're about to hear is education. It's analysis built on government data and 30 years of watching these cycles play out. It is not financial advice. Your situation is specific to you, and any major money decisions should involve a professional who actually knows your numbers. I'm the person who explains what's happening. The person who tells you what to do about it. That's between you and someone who's seen your tax return. All right, let's get into it. Now, if you watched our last video, the one on CPI, and what the April inflation numbers actually meant for your paycheck, you already saw the first warning sign. Wage growth was running at 3.6%. Inflation was at 3.8%. That gap, small as it looks on paper, is exactly what shows up in today's data. The BA just confirmed what we saw coming. If you missed that video, the link is in the description. It's the foundation for what we're building today. But even if this is your first time here, everything you need is in what comes next. So let's start with the headline number, because the headline, as usual, is misleading. Consumer spending rose 0.5% in April. That's the number that made it into most news reports. And on the surface, it sounds almost reassuring. People are spending. The economy is moving. Except that's not what's actually happening. Here's the first thing you need to understand about economic data. There's a difference between what something costs and what you actually get. Economists call it the difference between nominal and real. I call it the difference between the number on the receipt and what you walked out of the store with. Nominal spending was up 0.5%, but once you adjust for inflation, once you account for the fact that prices themselves went up, real spending grew by just 0.1%. 0.1%. That's not consumer confidence. That's not Americans feeling good about the economy and opening their wallets. That is Americans paying more for essentially the same things. Now let's look at where that money actually went, because this is where the story gets very specific. The single largest driver of spending in April? Gasoline and energy. $28.8 billion. In a single month. That's not a lifestyle choice. That's not someone deciding to treat themselves. That's the cost of filling up your tank to get to work. Right behind it, housing and utilities. $22.7 billion. Groceries, $9.5 billion. You see the pattern. Every major category driving that spending increase is something you cannot cut. You can't decide not to heat your home. You can't decide not to eat. You can't decide not to drive to work. These aren't discretionary expenses. This is the cost of existing in America in 2026. Now here's something interesting on the other side of that ledger. Motor vehicle spending dropped $9.2 billion, the sharpest decline of any category. People aren't buying cars. Now, that could mean a lot of things. But given what's been happening with trade policy and tariff uncertainty over the past several months, I don't think it's a coincidence. People are waiting. They're not sure what a car is going to cost in 6 months. That's a story we're going to come back to in more detail in the next video in this series. But let me bring this back to the core point, because I don't want you to lose the thread here. Spending went up. But real spending, what you actually got for your money, barely moved. The gap was filled entirely by higher prices on things you had no choice but to buy. Now, if you watched our CPI video last week, you already know where a significant piece of this energy price surge is coming from. The situation in the Middle East. Brent crude sitting between $108 and $113. That didn't start at your gas station. It started 10,000 miles away. We covered that chain of events in detail. The link is in the description. For today, what matters is the outcome. Americans are spending more and getting less, and that has consequences that go well beyond the monthly price of a tank of gas. Which brings us to the part of this story that I think deserves its own moment. Because when you put the income side and the spending side on the same chart, what you get is something I've started calling the triangle. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. All right. So we've established that spending is being driven by necessities, not by choice. Now let's zoom out and look at the full picture. I want you to think of this as a triangle. On one side, income is going down. Real disposable income fell 1.4% year over year. Your paycheck, after taxes and inflation, buys less than it did a year ago. On the other side, spending is going up, not because you want it to, but because the cost of the basics keeps climbing. And at the bottom of that triangle sits the consequence. Savings are draining, and debt is filling the gap. Let me give you the numbers on that debt, because they are staggering. The New York Federal Reserve published its quarterly debt report 2 weeks ago. Total household debt in America, $18.8 trillion. That's a record, and it's $4.6 trillion more than where we were at the end of 2001, just before the pandemic. Now, let me break that down into a number that actually means something for a household. Credit card debt alone, $1.25 trillion. That's $325 billion more than the previous record before the pandemic. The average household carrying credit card debt owes roughly $9,500. And here's the part that makes that number truly dangerous. The average credit card interest rate right now is 21%. Let me just do quick math for you. If your household owes $9,500 on your credit cards at 21%, you're paying about $165 a month just in interest, just to keep the balance where it is. If you're making minimum payments, you are barely touching the principal. You are running in place. And look, I know that's an uncomfortable number, but it's the number we need to see clearly because it explains why the savings rate is where it is. Here's what's happening underneath the surface. Americans had a cushion. During the pandemic, with stimulus checks and reduced spending, households built up what economists call excess savings. It was real money. The San Francisco Fed estimated that by August 2021, there was roughly $2.1 trillion in extra savings sitting in American bank accounts. $2.1 trillion. That sounds like a lot, and it was. But starting in 2022, it began to drain. About $100 billion a month, month after month. And by March of 2024, the San Francisco Fed published its final update. The excess savings were gone, completely. Now, and this is important, that's the aggregate number, the national total. Some research suggests that whatever savings remained by that point were concentrated almost entirely in the top 20% of earners. For the bottom 80% of American households, The cushion may have run out as early as 2023. So what happens when the cushion is gone and the bills keep rising? You borrow. And that's exactly what Americans are doing. There's a concept in economics called consumption smoothing. The basic idea is simple. When your income dips temporarily, instead of immediately cutting your lifestyle, you borrow a little to keep things stable. You smooth the rough patch, perfectly rational behavior. Economists have been writing about it since the 1950s. But there's a catch. Two catches, actually. First, smoothing only works if the income dip is temporary. If it's a bad month, you can borrow and pay it back when things get better. If it's a trend, you're not smoothing, you're sinking. Second, smoothing only works if credit is affordable. At 21% interest on credit cards, borrowing to maintain your standard of living isn't smoothing anything. It's accelerating the problem. You know, I used to explain this to junior analysts back at the agency. I'd tell them, consumption smoothing is like using a credit card to fix a leaky roof. If it rains once and you'll have the money next month, smart move. But if it rains every week and the interest is 21%, you don't have a roof problem anymore. You have a debt problem. And that is the triangle: income falling, spending rising on things you can't cut, and the gap being filled by debt that costs more than most people can sustainably carry. If this kind of analysis helps you understand what's happening to your finances, subscribing means you'll see the next one when it comes out. We do this every week. Same data, same approach, no sales pitch. But we're not done yet, because I want to show you something. The government publishes two different numbers for inflation, and understanding the difference between them might change how you think about everything we've just discussed. All right, so if you've been following the news, you've probably heard two different inflation numbers floating around. One says 3.8%, the other says 3.3%. Same country, same month, same economy. Two different numbers. That's not a mistake. They're measuring inflation in two fundamentally different ways. And understanding the difference matters more than most people realize, because one of them is the number the Federal Reserve actually uses to make decisions about interest rates, about your mortgage, about your car loan. So let's clear this up. The first one, CPI, the Consumer Price Index, is the one you hear about most. It's been around since 1919. It's what they use to calculate Social Security cost of living adjustments. It's what the media reports. It works by surveying households, asking people what they buy, and then tracking the prices of a relatively fixed basket of goods. The second one, PCE, Personal Consumption Expenditures, is published by the same agency that released yesterday's report, the BEA. It works differently. Instead of asking people what they buy, it looks at what businesses actually sell. And its basket isn't fixed. It adjusts when people change their behavior. Now, I know that sounds abstract, so let me give you the version I used to give new hires back at the agency. Think of CPI as a grocery list stuck to your refrigerator. It never changes. Steak is on the list. Every week you go to the store, and if steak went up from $12 to $18, CPI says inflation went up. The list doesn't care that you can't afford steak anymore. It just records the price. Now think of PCE as, well, think of it as a resourceful spouse. Steak goes to $18 and PCE says, all right, we're having chicken this week. And it tracks what you actually ended up eating, not what was on the original list. That's why CPI almost always runs higher than PCE, historically about 0.4 percentage points higher. CPI is stuck with the expensive list. PCE follows real behavior. And there's one more big difference. Housing. In CPI, housing-related costs make up about a third of the entire index, 33%. In PCE, it's about 15%. When rents are surging, as they have been, CPI feels that much more intensely. So, which one matters more? For your Social Security check, CPI matters. That's the one that determines your cost of living adjustment. But for the Federal Reserve, for the people deciding whether interest rates go up, stay flat, or come down, it's PCE. Specifically, Core PCE, which strips out food and energy to look at underlying trends. And right now, Core PCE is at 3.3%. The Fed's target is 2%. That's a 1.3 percentage point gap. And it's been widening since early 2025. In our last video, We looked at this from the CPI side and saw how 3.8% inflation was outrunning 3.6% wage growth. Today, the PCE data confirms the same pressure from the angle the Fed actually watches. And as long as that 3% number stays this far above target, rate cuts are not coming. That means your mortgage rate stays where it is. Your car loan stays expensive. And that 21% credit card interest we talked about a few minutes ago, it's not going anywhere either. Now, everything I've shown you so far is about the present, what the latest data says, what it means, where the pressure points are. But I've been doing this for a long time. And when I look at this data, the savings rate, the debt levels, the gap between income and spending, I don't just see today. I see a pattern I've seen before. I've been watching economic data for over 30 years. And in that time, I've learned something that no textbook teaches you. The numbers always tell you what's coming. Before the headlines do, you just have to know what to look for. So let me take you back to the summer of 2005. July 2005, the personal savings rate hit 1.4%, the lowest in the entire history of the data going back to 1959. And it didn't stop there. For 4 consecutive months that year, the savings rate went negative. That means Americans were spending more than 100% of their monthly after-tax income every single month for 4 months in a row. And yet, nobody panicked. You know why? Because home prices were going up. In 2005, homeowners pulled $750 billion in equity out of their homes. In 1996, that number was $106 billion. People were using their houses like ATMs. Need a new car? Tap the house. Want to renovate the kitchen? Tap the house. Behind on bills? Tap the house. And everybody had a reason for why it made sense. The house went up 80. $0 this year. Of course, I can borrow against it. Real estate only goes up. This time is different. That's 4 of the most expensive words in the English language, by the way. This time is different. By the end of 2007, household debt had reached 127% of disposable income. In 1990, it was 77%. Home prices peaked in 2006. By 2008, the system collapsed. Now, I'm telling you this story not to scare you. I'm telling you this because when I look at today's numbers, I see a pattern that rhymes. The savings rate in April 2026, 2.6%. In July 2005, it was 1.4%. We're not there yet, but the direction is the same. And here's the critical difference, the part that actually keeps me up at night more than the similarities do. In 2005, people had a cushion. It was a dangerous, illusory cushion, but it was there. Home equity. The house was going up in value, and you could borrow against it at low rates. Today, that cushion is gone. What replaced it is credit card debt at 21% interest. Back in 2005, when I was at the agency, I remember sitting in a meeting where someone presented the negative savings data, and one of the senior people in the room, smart guy, decades of experience, looked at it and said, "It's fine. The asset base is growing." The asset base stopped growing 18 months later, and everything that had been fine came apart in about 6 weeks. Now, I want to be careful here. I am not saying we're heading into 2008. The banking system is different. The housing market is different. The regulatory framework is different. What I am saying is that the behavior is the same. Spending beyond income, filling the gap with borrowed money, and telling ourselves it's temporary, when the data says it might not be. In 2005, they said the house will cover it. In 2026, the question is, what covers it now? And that question doesn't hit everyone equally. In fact, the data shows that this squeeze is breaking along very specific lines. There's a word that shows up constantly in economic reporting, and I need you to be suspicious of it every single time you hear it. That word is average. The average savings rate is 2.6%. The average household debt is such and such. The average American is doing this or that. The problem with averages is that they lie, not deliberately, but structurally. When you average a man who's drowning in 6 feet of water with a man standing on dry land, on average, they're both in 3 feet of water. On average, they're fine. They are not both fine. Here's what the data actually shows when you break it apart. The Bureau of Economic Analysis And the Bureau of Labor Statistics published a joint study in 2024, one of the most revealing pieces of economic research I've seen in years. They looked at personal savings, not as a national average, but by income group. The headline savings rate that year? About 3%. Sounds modest but functional, except for the bottom half of American households. The savings rate was negative. Negative, meaning they were spending more than they earned, not in one bad month, as a baseline. The bottom tenth? Negative 122% of disposable income. And the top 1%? 83%. That too. 6% national number we've been talking about this entire video. It's a fiction. It's the mathematical middle of two completely different realities. One America that's saving more than it can spend, and another America that's spending more than it can earn. And that's what economists mean when they talk about a K-shaped economy. The letter K, the top half goes up, the bottom half goes down, and they share the same starting point, but nothing else. Now let me show you where this becomes dangerous, not in theory, in people's actual lives. At a 2.6% savings rate, the median household, earning about $83,700 a year, is saving roughly $1,500 to $2,200. That's it for the entire year. That is a few weeks of expenses. Personal finance experts recommend a minimum of 3 months of expenses as an emergency fund. The Minneapolis Fed surveyed this directly and found that 46% of American households do not have 3 months of emergency savings. One job loss, one hospital bill, one car that breaks down at the wrong time. That's all it takes. And the early warning signs are already flashing. The New York Fed reports that 4.8% of all household debt is now delinquent, the highest level since 2017. Credit card serious delinquencies, that's 90 days or more past due, have climbed to a 15-year high. And the age group with the fastest acceleration? 18 to 29. Now I want to put this in context because context matters. During the Great Recession, the overall delinquency rate hit about 7%. We're at 4.8. We're not there. But we're trending in that direction. And the people trending fastest are the ones with the least margin for error. Speaking of people with thin margins, if you watched our first video in this series, you saw the math on retirees. Social Security's cost of living adjustment this year, 2.8%, CPI inflation, 3.8%. That gap means retirees are losing purchasing power every single month. And this low savings rate, it's cutting them from both sides. We went deep on that in the first video, including the Medicare premium increase that eats into the COLA before it even reaches the checking account. Link is in the description if you want the full breakdown. All right, we've covered a lot of ground today, and I want to bring it all together for you, not just what the data says, but what it means going forward, and whether there's anything in this picture that should give you a reason for cautious hope. All right, let's bring this home. We started today with a single number, 2.6%, the lowest savings rate in nearly 4 years. And I told you that by the end of this video, you'd understand the full picture of why. So here it is. Americans are earning less in real terms, down 1.4% year over year after inflation. At the same time, they're spending more, not on things they want, but on things they can't avoid. Gas, groceries, utility bills. The gap between those two realities is being filled by debt, $18.8 trillion of it, at interest rates that make it nearly impossible to climb out. The pandemic cushion is gone. The bottom half of the income distribution was already in negative savings territory before this latest data. And the delinquency numbers, especially among young Americans, are telling us that the stress isn't theoretical. It's showing up in missed payments right now. Now, I never want to leave you with just the problem. That's not what this channel is about. So let me give you something practical. If you are in a position to save, even a small amount, there is genuinely good news buried inside this data. The best high-yield savings accounts right now are paying around 4.1%. Core PCE inflation, the Fed's own measure, is 3.3%. That means if you can park money in one of those accounts, you are earning a real return. Your savings are actually growing faster than inflation is eroding them. That's rare. And it won't last forever, because the moment the Fed does cut rates, those yields come down. We did a detailed comparison of these accounts in our first video. If you want the specifics, it's in the description. But I also want to be honest with you. For a lot of Americans watching this, the problem isn't where to put savings. It's that there's nothing left to save. And if that's where you are, I want you to know that understanding what's happening is not a small thing. When you understand why your paycheck feels shorter, when you understand that it's not your budgeting that failed but a structural squeeze that's hitting millions of people at the same time, that changes how you make decisions, that changes what you prioritize, and it keeps you from blaming yourself for an economy that's working against you. Now, before I let you go, here's what I'm going to be watching over the next few weeks. And I'd encourage you to watch with me. If the savings rate drops below 2%, we're entering 2005 territory, and the conversation changes significantly. If the overall delinquency rate crosses 5%, that tells us the stress we're seeing today is turning into real breakage. And if core PCE starts falling, say below 2.5%, that means pressure is easing, and I'll be the first one to tell you. The next PCE report, May's data, comes out June 25th. I'll be here to break it down the same way we did today. And speaking of what comes next, this is the second video in the Middle Class Squeeze series. In the next one, we're going to look at something we've only touched on today, the role that trade policy and tariffs are playing in this picture. Because this squeeze isn't just about energy prices. There's a policy layer underneath it that's quietly reshaping what things cost in this country. That's coming soon. If you found value in what we covered today, a like tells the algorithm that this kind of content matters. And if you want to keep building your understanding of what's really happening to the American household, I'll see you in the next one. Take care of your money. It's not going to take care of itself.